Hello mga kametak. Musta kayo dyan? I hope na in-enjoy niyo na yung mga huling araw ng taon na ito, 2022. It was really an eventful year, even by my standards. I mean, my goodness, nagsimula ng taon na yan with yung war sa Ukraine. Andyan tayo, we were there in Europe when it happened. It really dominated yung conversations for quite some time. And of course, over the past week, sumusulat tayo ng mga year-enders, no, on different publications for, I've written year-enders for Nikkei Asia, for South China Morning Post, for The National in Abu Dhabi, among others, trying to recap no, yung nangyari over the past year. So balikan natin yan later this week, no, as the year draws to an end. Gusto ko lang sana continue yung usapin natin kahapon kasi I think I was talking about yung favorite book of the year, no. I'm not sure if I had as much time to read books this year as previous years. I mean, previous years it was insane, no? Parang every month multiple books, and I'm not talking about just any books. I'm not talking about books na 50 pages, 100 pages, or just some feel good books. I'm talking about books na sobrang mahaba, no. The books I read are sometimes 1,000 page long, which is happens to be also the length of the book that I found best for this year. I read novels of Dostoevsky, of Tolstoy na sobrang mahaba, no. Whether it's The Idiot, Brothers Karamazov, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, mahaba yan, mga yan. So they help me to develop my attention span, no, when it comes to reading books and all. So when I say, I'm reading 1 or 2 or 3 books a month before, at least, I'm not talking about just very short books. I'm talking about pretty long books. Sometimes yun lang, naisip natin, siguro, one of the things I introduced into my reading technique was to combine multiple books. So, for instance, you read 2 or 3 books simultaneously in a month. What you do is, either books are that radically different from each other, or books that are thematically similar to each other. At kung medyo feeling mo, isang part ng book is a little bit too much of a drivel, you shift to another book, then come back to it again, and then you compare and contrast. So you try to develop techniques, Now, obviously, because I work a lot with, I write a lot, we do vlogs, I'm on TV, etc. So I use my eyes a lot. So I try to make sure that I also calibrate how much reading I do. Now, I increasingly shifted from reading actual books to online books. Kindle in particular, because it's more affordable, it's more practical, but also because of the lighting. No, the lighting is much better. It's easier on your eyes, and it's easier for me also to make highlights. And as you can see, when I make highlights, each highlight has its own kind of relevance. So there are degrees of importance each of the highlights have. The blue is different from yellow, yellow is different from orange, orange is different from red, so color-coded yan. So medyo stabilo gang ang style ko magbasa. So this is how I read books, no? And then I take notes, I put them there. Now, of course, if you do scholarly books or semi-scholarly books, or you're a journalist for that matter, Kindle is also very helpful, because what it does is it allows you to get quotations, exact pages, so it makes referencing quotations much easier than the typical reading form from the book. Now, sometimes, of course, if the book is really close to my heart, books on Stoicism, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I need to have them in, hard, three-dimensional format, no? Para maamoy mo yung page, you feel it and all. But when it comes to reading books that are epic, that has a huge breadth of scholarly literature attached to it, among others, or books which are hard to obtain and will take time for delivery to come from abroad, sobrang mahal, then I just get the Kindle. I just keep on going, because mamaya pagdating na ng book, nag-move on ka na, diba? So you don't want to wait for that. You go for it, boom. And of course, Kindle also allows you to pre-order books. So if they're fantastic, interesting books that are that you have came across in reviews on New York Times, among others, and lalabas in 2 months, you already buy it, you pre-buy it, so that when it's published, it's immediately there in your library. Otherwise, you'll just forget about this, because there's so many good stuff coming out right and left. So I'm going to share to talk about 2 books today. One is the favorite book of the year I had, and I really spent a lot of months on it, back and forth in between travels and all. Not only because the book was long and at times even intellectually challenging and bracing, but at the same time exhilarating. But it's also because a lot of the things that you come across in the book challenges a lot of the other books that you have read throughout time, especially other long books that I've read, whether it's Steven Pinker's, Better Angels of Our Nature, whether it's Noval Harari's book Homo Sapiens and Homo Deus, whether it's books by Francis Fukuyama, especially his two-volume book on political order, origins of political order, and political decay. These are books that are 1,000-page long, or hundreds of pages long. So you spend a lot of time on them, and then suddenly you come across a new book, a fantastic book, which challenges a lot of these books, and it does it in a very credible, in a very seamless way. Then, of course, you want to spend time on that so that you absorb it properly. You're not just ticking the boxes. I don't like doing that. I'm very methodical. I take notes. So on these books alone, I have multiple pages of notes, 10 probably pages of notes, and not 10 files of notes. So it's really, really heavy, There's so many quotable quotes. There's so many beautiful works cited here. There's so many moments of realizations like, here. So this is the book I'm talking about. It's the book Dawn of Everything by A New History of Humanity. It's really, title pa lang, it's very, very ambitious, but hindi ambitioso, by David Graeber and David Wengrow, two UK-based scholars. One of them unfortunately passed away not long ago, but these are fantastic books, and they're anthropologists, so they're not political scientists, they're not economists, but they're anthropologists, and there's something about anthropologists that allows them to much better dissect the nature of evolution of human societies over the years than the typical literature that you come across, and that's why I found it fascinating. There are many parts of the book whereby they directly or passive-aggressively challenge other fantastic works throughout the years, whether it's Noval Harari's works, whether it's Fukuyama's works, whether it's Steven Pinker's books. I like that, and I think they did it pretty well. It's a solid book. It's a very long book. So I really suggest you guys try to read that. The other book I'll talk about is also that it came out just the other month, so hindi ko pa siya natapos. And these are the kind of books that are kind of, they're very inspirational because they're kind of a self-help type of book, but they're not self-help books. They're political books that are almost self-help. So I'll talk about that later on also. Going back again to Dawn of Everything, we were discussing this kahapon mga kameta, biglang nakat yung malabo ba't yung connection dito, nata-traffic, no? So nakat na, hindi ko na pinil, sabi ko bukas na lang balikan natin na mabuti yan. Now, the thing with Dawn of Everything is this. I'll talk about the book on 5 levels, no? First of all, one of the things I really appreciate about the book is how it underscores yung good side of human nature based on archaeological evidence, not just based on some philosophical argument and abstraction. No, in fact, the book starts by reflecting on Jean-Jacques Rousseau's reflections on origins of inequality, and his theories about the first men, right, and the first societies and all in the state of nature. I'm not gonna go into the Rousseau, Locke, and Hobbes kind of debate. Just keep it here. Now, the first thing I really appreciate is that how in the book, just in the first few chapters, you will come across fascinating archaeological evidence that suggests that tayo mga tao, we have been historically actually not only cooperative but also compassionate. That it's not true that we were just a bunch of Darwinian alpha males versus beta males, and then over time the alpha males get all the women and pass down all their genes and all that kind of nonsense you come across on YouTuber stuff, right? All this YouTuber nonsense you see there. If only people bother to actually read good stuff, and research about what is real good stuff and know what is the good stuff, then I think we would have avoided a lot of these idiots and a lot of this ignoramus becoming kind of a overrated YouTuber talking heads. Anyway, going back to this, mga kameta, one of the things that really caught my attention and in fact was very heartening was the fact that we have archaeological evidence to suggest that yung ating mga ancestors, long time ago, thousands of years ago, before the advent of agricultural societies, they took care of their weakest link. They took care of their sickly. They took care of people with genetic disorders and all. So let me talk about one interesting passage here. So for instance, I'll show you guys this passage. 1 second, let me just pull it out. Hopefully, kapag nag-pack na tayo sa OBS, naghahang na yung ano ko eh. Naghahang na tong ano ko sa kakadami. Okay, so, one of the things that the book challenges is this simplistic portrayal of the primeval societies, no, based on very selected cases, no, or what they accuse as cherry picking, no. So Steven Pinker, Noval Harari, among other people, have built a whole corpus of argument over very few cases. So, for instance, this is the Otzi, the Tyrolean Iceman, no, some corpse they found a little over 5,000 years ago, and apparently there were evidence that this person went through a lot of violence. No, so the idea was that okay, nakahanap tayo ng isang corpse. There are a lot of signs of violence, so maybe societies back then were a bunch of just barbaric people. No, apparently, what's interesting is that if you actually dig deeper, there are a lot of other there are other evidences that suggest that actually our ancestors were much more compassionate and cooperative than we give them credit. So, for instance, he talks about Romito II, right? Which is named after the Calabrian rock shelter where it was found. Romito II is a 10,000-year-old burial of a male with a rare genetic disorder, acromesomelic dysplasia, a severe type of dwarfism, which in life would have rendered him both anomalous in his community and unable to participate in the kind of high-altitude hunting that was necessary for their survival. No? Studies of his pathology show that despite general poor levels of health and nutrition, that same community of hunter-gatherers still took pains to support this individual through infancy and into early adulthood, granting him the same share of meat as everyone else and ultimately according him a careful, sheltered burial. So again, we're talking about a person with a dwarfism condition. So clearly he was not in a position to engage in the kind of high-intensity hunter-gatherer activities that his community was involved. And yet, parating sinisigurado ng kanyang mga kasama na bibigyan siya ng just the same share of meat as everyone else. And not only that, when he passed away, they made sure that his burial was done with ultimate dignity and reverence and respect. This is just completely heartening. Neither is Romito II an isolated case. When archaeologists undertake balanced appraisals of hunter-gatherer burials from the Paleolithic, they find high frequencies of health-related disabilities. So maraming nahanap ng mga burial sites of people with disabilities, no, who were buried with ultimate dignity and respect. No? So we would have reached the exact opposite conclusion to what people like Pinker, Steven Pinker have been saying about the nature of primeval societies, or Thomas Hobbes were saying about the state of nature hundreds of years ago. This is beautiful. They say, our species is a nurturing and caregiving species, and there was simply no need for life to be nasty, brutish, or short, as Thomas Hobbes put it more than half a century ago. No? Early human social life were far more complex, and there was so much more compassion and cooperativeness there. No, so they go on and on talking about so many cases that show that actually our ancestors were nurturing people. They took care of their weakest link. No, it's very different from the kind of Hobbesian trap. This is a Pinker term. Because if you look at the works of people like Steven Pinker, they'll say, okay, we were a bunch of crazy barbarians, violent people, but over time, our life expectancy increased, our life became more humane, etc., thanks to enlightenment, thanks to Western civilization, blah, 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 right? So he does that in multiple books, including, It's Time for Enlightenment, his book on the better angels of our nature. You can see that. I love that. I really appreciate that, because we're here looking at actual evidence. So Romito II, among others, shows that our ancestors gave dignity and respect and gave ultimate care and compassion to the weakest link in their communities, including those who had genetic disorders or those who were probably injured or had disabilities, among others. So that's one thing that I very much appreciated about this book. No, it talks about the non-Darwinian, non-Hobbesian side of our human nature, right? That I really like. I really enjoyed that. That I really appreciate. Now, the second thing I like about this book is that it also questions yung hypothesis na our modern notions of freedom, our modern notions of individual rights, that our modern notions of egalitarianism, equality, representative government, check on tyranny, checks and balances, is a construct of the West, particularly Western Europe, right? Now, we all know that's nonsense if you really did your history, because you would know that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that consultation, council-based decision-making goes back to ancient times in the Middle East. No? So Sumerians, Babylonians, there's a lot of evidence to suggest they had things that we would call like parliaments today. And in fact, in Arabic, the term mushawara, right, to consultation, is something that is always emphasized in terms of governance and all. Other civilizations also have that. The Chinese have that. The Indians have that, so on and so forth. We have had that in our barangay system, probably to a certain degree too. For instance, the Babaylan, no, had a lot of influence in making sure that the Datu or the Sultan or whatever was not overly tyrannical or predominant in shaping everyday activities and behavior of a community. No. Now, going back to this, what's really fascinating about this book is that it goes into history proper, namely how Western European scholars and initially actually friars from France and other parts of Europe, when they conquered indigenous Americans, I'm talking about yung colloquially termed as Red Indians, no? Indigenous American communities. And of course, we know that they came from Asia. No, they came from the Bering Straits. They came from Russia, Siberia. So they are also kind of quote unquote yellow race like us. But anyway, the Amerindians, no, or Red Indians in colloquial normal terms, they were actually extremely egalitarian societies. Women were very powerful. The tribal chiefs had very limited power over individuals. So there was a lot of latitude for individual freedom, for consultation, for, let's just call it, primeval forms of democratic exercise. No? And what's interesting is that the Europeans, particularly European thinkers and intellectuals, Voltaire among others, they drew on the exchanges and debates between Amerindians and Red Indian intellectuals, and how they were criticizing pre-Enlightenment Europe, the absolutist monarchical Europe and the medieval Europe. No, so it's really fascinating if you look at this book. Actually, it traces, and this is where it went against my instinct, because not necessarily my instinct, because although this is where probably I also kind of disagree, because my argument is a lot of notions of individual rights, notions of democracy, consultation in Western Europe was also drawn from Eastern traditions, whether from Middle East, from India, from the Silk Road, among others. But going back to this, it's fascinating because the book shows that a lot of our modern political ideals are actually not from Western Europe per se, but came from North America, especially the tribes there that were flourishing and thriving even up to 100 years into the colonization of North America and the Americas by the European conquistadors and the English and the French and so on and so forth. So that's fascinating. I didn't know about, to be honest. I didn't know about that side. I was very aware of how Europe drew a lot of its science, mathematics, and among others from the East. So for instance, kaya nga algebra, algorithm, no? The reason it's there's a lot, because it comes from the Islamic world, right? Al-Khwarizmi, for instance, Avicenna, a lot of these people were extremely influential in shaping modern sciences and mathematics, calculus, so on and so forth. What I didn't know about is the transatlantic exchange that will happen a few hundred years later. So I'm talking about 9th century to 12th, 13th century Islam, golden age of Islam, the influence it had on European societies, especially via Venetians, via Genoese merchants who would go to the Ottoman Empire, would go to the Islamic world, so on and so forth. That's why if you go to Venice, you can see a lot of Islamic architecture there, right? So Renaissance starts in Venice, in Florence, and those places. In Venice, Florence, they were absorbing a lot from the East, right? That I was very aware of. But this transatlantic infusion of democratic ideals that will later on be packaged as Western Enlightenment, that I didn't know much about. So I was really taken by that. I was really fascinated by that. As I said again, hopefully once we have OBS, pwede natin i-discuss na ng mas mabuti, and I can show you quotations, the individuals that were discussed, etc. The third thing I really like about the book is how it emphasizes the role of women in the early development of whether medicine, agriculture, among others. So the first farmer, quote unquote, was likely a woman. The first human being that made different concoctions for herbal medicine, among others, was likely a woman. The earliest evidence we have of agricultural societies is in today's Turkey, in northern portions of the Middle East. So that's also very fascinating. I really, really like that. I really like that how women were extremely influential and extremely important to the early development of civilization. The fourth thing also that I really like about this book is what it says about diet. Now, this is very important because ngayon, uso yung mga keto diet, yung mga ganyan, yung mga caveman diet, whatever. What's fascinating about this book is that it looks at the actual evidence. So, for instance, you have skulls left from people from thousands of years ago, and you can do testings on them based on scientific method. And they were able to discover not only meat, but also carbs, vegetables, etc., fruits, so on and so forth. So what's very fascinating is that, number 4, very fascinating is that the evidence shows that our ancestors had a very healthy, diverse diet. It is not true that they were just eating meat all the time, right? And so way into the development of first civilizations, like the Sumerian civilizations, we had an extremely diverse diet. We were eating fruits, we were eating vegetables, we were eating a lot of meat. And we know from evidence that our ancestors were walking up to 10 to 15,000 steps a day. So they had a diverse and balanced diet, but also a very active lifestyle, right? That for me was very amazing. Was amazing because there's so much debate right now about, our food is too much carbs, let's just go full meat and keto and all. It's like me, I'm not. And it's supposedly because our ancestors were like that. It's like, what are you doing? Ano, saan mo nakuha yung napulot yan? Sa mga YouTubers or yung mga questionable scientists said, no, that's not how it is. In fact, if you look at the origins of keto diet, you'll get to know that was a kind of a early modern interpretation of how our ancestors were living. But that's not true. The evidence suggests that vast majority of our ancestors, we're talking about skulls discovered all around the world. If you look at their teeth, mga leftovers, peri-detect mo yan. They were eating a healthy diet, a balanced diet, very balanced diet, And in fact, some scientists would tell you that human beings, evolutionary biology allows us to be able to thrive on a whole host of different dietary inputs, which goes against many interesting books like Against the Grain. It's a fantastic book by Yale University political scientists who argued that once we shifted from something like a keto diet to, let's say, carbs heavy diet, etc., we became shorter, weaker, blah blah blah. I personally limit my carbs, especially at night. I agree with that, but it's complete nonsense to say that our ancestors were just kind of keto and living on meat. That's not true. They were eating fruits. They were eating many things from their environment, depending on the diversity of their ecological circumstances. So then again, that I really appreciate. And this is a book with hundreds of pages of references. It's solid. Now, there are many things that I like, but number 5, the fifth thing, honestly, I have no notes. I'm just saying this out of my heart, because it was a book that had a lot of influence on me. The fifth thing that I really appreciate about this book is this. Apparently, we didn't have the cradle of civilization. We have had cradles of civilization, simultaneously emerging on multiple continents. Now, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and Europe, so for a long time, I just felt, that it made sense to argue that the Middle East is really the cradle of civilization. I know our friends in China are very proud of their civilization and all, but sorry, the Great Wall of China is what? Barely 2,000 years old? Like, hello, you go to Egypt, you'll find pyramids are 7,000 years old, right? You go to, many parts of the Middle East, you can find beautiful palaces and pillars from 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. So, I never bought this argument that China is the oldest civilization. Absolutely not. But what this book forced me to realize is that probably the Middle East also is not the oldest civilization in the world, not necessarily the cradle of civilization. It's very possible that we also had many, many important civilizational sites way outside the Middle East and China and India. So we're talking about not only in Americas, So there are evidence to suggest that there were new archaeological evidence that suggests that there were like huge structures and big cities in the Americas more than 7 to 9,000 years ago. In modern day Turkey, we have found temples that date to more than 9,000 years ago. And then, interestingly, in today's Kazakhstan and Ukraine and Romania, we're also chancing upon archaeological evidence that suggests we had many civilizations 7, 6, 8, 9,000 years ago. So the Amazonas, for instance, that you find in the Greek literature, these are the Scythians, no? These are the Aryan Iranic people who were people of the steppes, no? Roaming today's Kazakhstan all the way to Ukraine, no? These people had amazing civilizations also back in the day. And that's what's largely forgotten in everyday discussion of cradle of civilization. So apparently we had cradles of civilization, and it's very possible that Turkey, Kazakhstan, Romania, Ukraine, not to mention big parts of the Americas, from the south, the Inca sites, all the way to the north, to the Aztec, etc., they may have had sophisticated civilizations as early as the Sumerians in today's Iraq. No, in fact, we also don't know much about the other civilizations that were happening to the east of the Sumerians, including in today's Iran, in northern parts of Pakistan and India. So there are also many fascinating archaeological findings of villages dating back to 8, 9, 10,000 years ago in southern Iran, near the Elamite kingdoms, but to the east of Elamite kingdoms and to the north of Pakistan, among others. These are fascinating. So what this does is it decenters our Middle East-centric, Eurocentric, Sinocentric understanding of civilization. And it's fascinating that we're able to develop all of these amazing civilizations from all the way north in Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Romania and the Black Sea area to the center, to the Middle East, eastern plains of China, to Egypt, and all the way down. In fact, we still don't know much about what was also happening in our part of the world, in the Philippines. So there's a lot of evidence that suggests that Indonesia, Austronesians also have had one of the oldest civilizations. So we may have more and more archaeological evidence to suggest that we in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, may have had also very, very old civilizations, much older than those in the Middle East or just as old as those in the Middle East and China, etc., etc. So that I really enjoyed. It is kind of a, shattering the myths about the origins of human civilizations and all of that, no? So these are the 5 key points, takeaway points I have from this fascinating book. Napagod na ako. Next time na natin pag-usapan yung Persuader. Siguro hopefully tomorrow or siguro tomorrow na lang. So again, I really suggest you guys read this book. Fascinating book. The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by 2 really brilliant anthropologists. And if you want to appreciate, hear things from their own point of view, listen to their podcast interviews, all around the world, or look at the reviews of their books on New York Times, The Guardian, and others. Really good books. But you really have to read the book itself to appreciate just the depth of scholarly literature they amass and mobilize in order to shatter a lot of myths, prejudices, and just sheer ignorance we have about our ancestors. For me, it was a very hopeful book. For me, it was a very uplifting book. For me, it helped me to see things literally from the whole breadth of history, not just past 100 years, 500 years, but really from the past at least 20 to 30,000 years, no? So that I really appreciate. And the book also raises a lot of questions, which is saying like, there are many questions we still cannot answer because we still need more archaeological evidence. And it's very possible that even more archaeological evidence later on will once again force us to reconsider a lot of our assumptions, presuppositions, or in retrospect, myths about origins of humanity and human civilizations. The chapters on Mexico, today's Mexico, and Aztec Maya civilization is also fascinating. That could be a whole vlog in itself. Especially the sections on conquistadors, how the conquistadors were able to conquer. So, for instance, you see a lot of question of the book Apocalypto, which tried to portray the indigenous civilizations there as a bunch of like crazy barbarian oppressive people. But Apparently, it's far more complicated than that. Far more complicated than that. No, Inca civilization down in today's Peru, etc. Those areas, that was also very fascinating in itself. No, and also the kind of social arrangements they had, the infrastructures they were able to build, the communities they were able to connect. So, yan, balikan natin yan. So hopefully we can do this, guys. Yeah. I know the Guns, Germs, and Steel. That's also another book that they question. So in this book, if you read it, it also questions a lot of arguments raised by, ano pangalan ulit ng author? Guns, Germs. See, I know the book, but see, Jared Diamond. All right, so Jared Diamond is also very much questioned in this book, and justifiably so. Ayan na, may mga nagre-react na sa mga anash natin dito. Okay, so separate na lang natin pag-usapan. Yung isa pang book, hindi ko pa natapos kasi kakalabas lang last month. And sorry, I've been so busy because I write, I have to write all the time, di ba? Not to mention vlogs and all. So that limits my ability to read long books. I read a lot of articles and shorter essays, academic works, etc. But long books medyo naapektuhan. But I hope I can finish this book soon. It's a fascinating book. It's called The Persuaders. And it's something I want to talk to you guys about because ang argument niya is exactly what I've been saying. Cancel culture, branding people as X, Y, and Z. That's not the way forward. And that democracy fundamentally relies on our ability to have dialogue and conversation with each other. It's a fascinating book, The Persuaders. Easy to read. And it's based on interviews with a lot of people on the front line. People who have tried to bring different camps together with varying degrees of success. So it's a book at the front lines of the fight for hearts, minds, and democracy. The fundamental argument of this book is that you cannot have democracy if you cannot have dialogue and heartfelt exchanges with people from the other side of the political spectrum. If you're just going to have dialogue and conversation with like-minded people, that's tribalism. Democracy is fundamentally about reaching across the aisle, reaching across the fences. And you may not convince many people, maybe only few people, but just the attempt of reaching out and not canceling the other side and not looking at your side as the good side and the other side as evil, that is extremely essential to the success of democracy. Absolutely essential to the success of democracy. And for me, that's exactly what I believe in. That's why we do what we do. And that's why na-appreciate natin. Now we have followers from across the political spectrum. I get messages throughout the year saying, Sir, hindi ako agree masyado sa iyo sa mga ibang bagay-bagay, pero nirespeto ko yung mga sinasabi mo. Or Sir, baka iba yung mga binuboto natin o gusto natin mga politiko. Or Sir, ka-unity po ako, or ganyan. Or Sir, ako'y kakamping ganito. I don't agree with everything you said. Kasi syempre, kinikriticize kasi natin yung mga different sides. But I appreciate your efforts to reach out. I appreciate for you your efforts to look at post-political or non-partisan angles to good governance and nation building. No? So yung mga ganun ang pinag-usapan natin. Alright, mga kamenda. So there goes my best book of the year, at least from my experience. But if you don't believe me, look at the reviews of this book. I think it has 5,000 reviews. It's insane. It's ambitious. It's epic in terms of its scale and coverage. It's extremely, I would say, impressive in terms of its scholarly basis, just the reference lists. And it's just beautifully and passionately written. The prose is just beautiful. So, yun lang, medyo mahaba lang siya. Kasi nung diba, parang hindi natatapos to. Kasi Kindle ko binabasa eh. Ang kapal kasi yung mga so it's hard for me when I travel a lot, diba? Kasi na-hurt ako when my books get wrinkled and all. So I rather just read in Kindle. And then so, for mga books ni Rizal, meron ako yung mga sobrang ganda na hindi ko pa na tapos daming markado yung Kindle. Parang ayaw ko markaan masyado yung mga books eh. They're like my babies. Anyway, so yun, mga kameta, that's my recommendation for the best book of the year. Believe me, I have top 5 books. There are 2 or 3 other fascinating books I want to talk about, maybe differently. But really, if I'm going to recommend just one book for this year, it's The Dawn of Everything. But heading to the next year, the book that I want you guys to read, especially yung mga naniniwala sa ginagawa natin dito, which is reaching across the aisle, creating dialogue, conversation, not canceling each other, but trying to talk to each other, engage with each other. Yes, syempre, minsan troll yung iba, tinatroll ko rin sila. Given na yan, kantsawan lang yan. Konting bardagulan here and there is unavoidable. But at the end of the day, I believe in the art of persuasion because I believe persuasion is fundamental to any functioning democracy. So next vlog natin, pag-usapan natin itong book, a book that I want us to read for early first quarter of next year, God willing. So maraming salamat guys. Thank you very much. Let me just say thanks sa lahat ng nagbibigay ng suporta sa atin. Kay Veret, CEO Villaranda, maraming salamat for your support and joining us. For Eden Olonan, as always, ma'am, thank you so much. Kay Riz Annie, thank you so much. Kat Rodriguez, Amy Venson, Jocelyn Lombere, it's really, really kind of you. Ayan, super, thank you. Ayan, so nakikita natin, I'm glad to see people are appreciating mga book recommendations natin and all. Okay, that's great. Mitch Tengcho and si Mitch din. Yeah, Mitch, I'm telling you, yeah, the Noel Harari is good, but it's so 2019. All right, go for something new and even more fascinating. No, Robert Takanarikua, thank you so much also for your support. Sir Michael Uy, as always. Again, to Jocelyn Lumbero, among others, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Please continue to support us, give comments and suggestions. Ayoko rin naman hanggang tayo, mga daily events, pardagulan and all. Let's talk about real stuff. Let's talk about good books. Let's talk about what we can learn from good books. So there you go. Just to summarize, 5 key takeaways from, for me, the best book of the year, The Dawn of Everything. Quite a long book, but great book. Is first of all, it shows that our ancestors were far more compassionate and cooperative than we appreciate, and far more, humane than portrayed in many of other books by many other leading scholars or writers, public intellectuals for that matter. Number 2, I think I appreciated the fact that, the book talks a lot about how women were very essential to the development of first civilizations, especially agricultural societies in the Middle East, in today's Turkey, among others. I appreciate the fact that the book decenters our understanding of only 1 or 2 regions as the cradle of civilization, namely Middle East, but it looks at the development of civilization simultaneously all across the world, from Kazakhstan and Ukraine in the north all the way down to Inca, and other kind of civilizations in the Americas that we are yet discovering and trying to fully understand. I also appreciate the fact that the book talks about how many of what we consider as Western Enlightenment values actually have their roots not in the West, not in Europe, not even in Asia and Eurasia for that matter. Likely a lot of that came from North America and from Amerindians or from North American indigenous communities, of course, lastly, what I also really appreciated about this book, ilan na? Naka-4 na ba tayo? 5 na tayo? No. What I also appreciated a lot about this book is that it forces us to re-examine a lot of our certainties, about how far we have come. Because maybe, okay, yeah, I think a part of about diet, I love how this book talks about how our ancestors, who were very strong and healthy, actually had very balanced diet. And that's based on the evidence they found on their teeth, among others. You can do carbon testing, so on and so forth. There's a lot of technology to see. So a lot of our ancestors actually had very balanced diet. They were, having berries, having meat. They were running a lot. They were very active. So good, diverse, balanced, heavy diet and heavy exercise, right? That I really like. And appreciate. All right. Shout out John, kay Doctora Patricia. Thank you very much for greeting. Kay Daddy, thank you very much. And again, salamat again, guys. Hopefully we can do more of this kasi ayoko po ng politika lang. Nakaka-stress yung politika. But, as I said, that's why my book for my recommendation, the next recommendation book is The Persuaders, is because even if nakaka-stress ang politika, kailangan natin mag-usap. We need to talk. Right? We need to talk about this. So this is the next book that I want to discuss with you guys. It's easy to read. It's fascinating. It just came out the other month. So get a copy of it. And for me, minsan matagal na by the time I deliver. I think Kindle is much more practical. Maybe you can have some few books that you can touch and feel, maybe spiritual books. But there are many great books there that if you're just going to wait for its delivery, baka wala ka ng time by the time na deliver. So just be practical. Go for Kindle. It's cheaper. It's more practical. It's easier to make notes and all. So you can say, this is how I read. Almost every page has notes, color coded. Each color has its own different relevance. So this is how I read my books. Stabilo gang. So this is how I do it. Okay. All right. Fascinating, guys. So I have 3 or 4 other books for 2020 that I want to talk about, including from very good friends of mine, Howard French from New York University, and my good friend Bill Hayton also from the United Kingdom. They also had 2 fascinating books, one on Africa and origins of civilization via Africa. That's Howard French, really great book. And the other one also by Bill Hayton. It's about the construction of China, modern China. That's also a great book that I want to talk about. All right? But in the meantime, let's just stick to this. All right? Thank you very much. God bless. Adios. Hasta mañana. God willing.